Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Po, and today I'm here with my husband, Sush.
Hello.
And we are going to be talking about the books that we're planning to nominate for the Hugo Awards this year. The nomination deadline is March 15th, which is quite soon. So we might end up reading some other things and changing what our nomination list is, but for now, these are the books and stories and things like that that have made our list. There are quite a few different categories in the Hugos, and there's a bunch of categories that we're not going to be nominating for because we just haven't read anything that we want to nominate in that category, but we'll talk about the ones that we have. A lot of the research that we have done in figuring out what even was eligible is based on the Lady Business Hugo nomination spreadsheet, so I'm going to link that below if you want to check that out and see what all people have been thinking about nominating. And another great resource is Kristen at Kristenelle SFF Reader. I'm going to link her channel below. She has done a whole series of videos talking about books that she is thinking about nominating. So that's another great resource. So the first category that we're going to be nominating in is the novels category, starting with Bad Witch Burning by Jessica Lewis. I read this just a couple months ago and I thought it was absolutely fantastic. I have a whole review for that, so it's linked below. But basically, this is a story of a teenage girl who is struggling. So this is set in the contemporary world, and she has kind of a mom who hasn't been working and is dating sort of deadbeat guys, and the girl, Cottrell, is trying so hard to keep them above water, but everything keeps going wrong. She has a side gig though, because she is able to speak to the ghosts of people who have passed, and so she brings those ghosts back for people to talk to as a little bit of way to make a side hustle, except that her magic changes, and suddenly instead of bringing back ghosts, she's bringing back bodies, and she has a lot of very complicated decisions to make. I loved the creepiness of this, I loved the magic, I loved the social commentary, and I really loved the characters and the character growth arcs. It is heartbreaking, but also so neat in terms of the power and the magic, and Cottrell's such a strong character. So I love this book so much.
Next up, we have The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri, and absolutely loved it. It's an epic fantasy, and we've read things by Tasha Suri before, and this one for me, it continues my string of excellent books by her. It is based off a lot of Indian mythos, this time taking loosely from various tales of the Mahabharata, which is an Indian epic, but also weaving something really fresh and interesting out of it. The politics in this, the different decisions made by different people with different preferences and needs are really satisfying to read about. And overall, the scale is both grand and personal in a really nice way. I highly recommend this book.
Yeah, same for me. I also have a review for this, so that's linked below. I think the magic system in this, and like you said, the kind of very complex characters are fantastic. Next is Light from Uncommon Stars by Aoki. This is another book that I read recently and have a review for. I thought this was just so fantastic, but also kind of weird, so you have to be up for that. This is a story that takes place in modern day, and it follows three women. One who is a trans girl that has run away from home. She's a teenager, and she's a violin player. And then we follow another woman who basically sold her soul to some demons in order to gain a lot of powers, and she has to turn in the souls of 7 students for that. And then we also follow a woman who is a captain of a spaceship who has come with her alien family to basically LA and set up a donut shop. And the lives of these 3 women intersect. This book is filled with so much really beautiful and also funny writing. It's got a ton of food writing as well as beautiful descriptions of music and just so much heart. And it's all about how we can be there for each other, but with this really interesting science fantasy mixture. I thought it was just wonderful.
Next up, we have The Witness for the Dead by Katherine Addison. And this is a companion novel to The Goblin Emperor. And that's a book that I absolutely loved back when I read it. It's a fantasy of manners. This book is set in the same world and follows one of the side characters from the first book. You do not have to read the first book to get a lot out of the second. One of the things that happens in this book very early on is there's an opera, and it talks about how people don't want these grand operatic thing of kings and queens. They want to focus on the common person and their day-to-day lives. And it's funny because I think that's what this book is really trying and doing, in that it is a shift away from court politics and entering into daily interactions. And Tara Kelleher, who is the primary character of this, is a witness for the dead. It's kind of a priest plus detective kind of person who can speak to the deceased to try and find out what happened and see that they get their last rites taken care of and that sort of a thing. Tara's day-to-day trials and tribulations. And it strings together almost like a series of detective stories, but also kind of personal struggles and things like that. So it is so beautifully done. If you just want to kind of get yourself whisked away into this lush fantasy land for a little while, I highly recommend this book.
Next is The Chosen and the Beautiful by Nghi. This is a really interesting Great Gatsby retelling that is told from the perspective of a different character, Jordan Baker, who in this version is the adopted daughter of some rich people, but she's originally from Vietnam. And she has a paper cutting magic, and there's also some demons and things like that in this world. It is very much a retelling of The Great Gatsby, kind of follows those same beats. And what I love about this so much, even though The Great Gatsby is not really a book that I care about, is the lushness, the vividness of the writing, the way that it immerses you in this kind of age of excess. And there is just such lush writing and great descriptions to go along with it. I thought it was such a neat take on a classic that I really think it was doing something special. And one more in this category is A Snake Falls to Earth by Darcie Little Badger. This is a really sweet and gentle story that takes place both on Earth as well as in the reflected world, which is where sort of the animal people and spirits live. And we follow two storylines, two characters. One is Nina, who is a Lipin Apache girl who lives in, actually it might be a slight future from now, but lives in Texas with her family, and she is trying to follow up on some stories told by her great-great-grandmother about the animal people, about the reflected world, this sort of thing. And then the other storyline that we follow is Ollie, who is a snake person, and he has to leave the nest and kind of go out, forge his own path. And we follow him as he tries to figure out just how to set things up for himself, as he gathers a wonderful found family group of friends, and the quest that he has to go on to help them out when one of them needs some assistance. And it's just such a sweet story. It has a lot of good ecological themes, great themes of family and friendship, and really, really cool mythology. So if you're looking for just a really gentle, wonderful mythological read, I think this is perfect. Now moving on to the novellas, starting with These Lifeless Things by Premi Mohammed. This is a cosmic horror novella that is set in the future, and we follow two timelines. So we follow a woman who is an anthropologist about 50 years after these sort of cosmic horror alien interdimensional things have invaded Earth and basically killed off 99% of people. And she is part of a group of researchers who are trying to go back to these sites of the invasion, these siege cities, to understand what happened and piece it together, because people still don't understand. And she finds the diary of a woman who was living through that siege. And so she's reading through this diary, but also trying to do, her own research, figuring out what happened. And the whole story is just those two timelines weaving together, and a lot of really interesting commentary about invasions, but taking this alien invasion and relating it also to human invasions, and about survival and about what we have to do. It has a great creepy atmosphere and is very philosophical, I think, in the way that it approaches it. The writing is beautiful. It is rather unresolved, so if you don't like unresolved endings, this may not be for you, but I thought that the questions it brought up were just wonderful.
Next up, also by Premi Mohammed, is The Annual Migration of Clouds. This novella is kind of a eco-dystopian sort of a thing, and there's a bunch of things that are going on in a world that has kind of receded into these small settlements where people are trying to come together as small communities, foraging and kind of really trying to make do with what they can with in a world that is, dying out in a sense. But really what I really liked about the story is that while that is part of the environment, that's the backdrop. And this is really a story about a girl who has gotten an admit into elite university, so to speak, and she has to leave home. And and what that means and entails. All the relations that she has with the various people around her, with her friends, with her mom, and things like that, and various kinds of patterns that happen, and kind of the stories we tell ourselves, and what kind of it takes to kind of take a fresh start on that. It's what does it mean to say I want to leave all this behind and go do something else? What would push you away, but also what would keep you behind, or I shouldn't say keep you behind as much as keep you where you are. And so these kinds of push and pull kind of things is really interesting for me, and I thought the story explored them really well.
Next is The Return of the Sorceress by Silvia Moreno Garcia. This is a sword and sorcery type of story that is in a fantasy world sort of inspired by Mesoamerican cultures. And we follow a priestess, a sorceress, who is very, very powerful, and she was sort of the head of the guild of sorcerers, except that she has been ousted by an ex-lover, and now she's trying to claw her way back into power. So this story is all about her and her relationship with power and what she's willing to do for it. And it's really beautifully told. I love the magic in this. There's all of this relationship to color as well, and the way that everything plays out, and she has a magical animal companion that is just a ton of fun. So I really enjoyed this one.
Next up, we have Remote Control by Nnedi Okorafor. And in this story, we have this little girl, Sankofa, who basically is seen as kind of, by the broader populace, as a companion of death, who kind of is both bad luck and is also a person who helps in last rites and that sort of a thing. And there is also something about her, and this is a mildly dystopian setting, which kind of seems to basically negate all tech around her. And so there's this notion of people are a little unsettled by her, afraid of her, and yet do not like her, and basically she faces a hard time wherever she goes. And she is by herself, going about trying to figure out what she wants to do next. She, in a sense, makes up a quest for herself and plays it out. And it's about all the kind of interactions that she has with society along the way. This is such a neat book in terms of social dynamics. The role of, I would say, not role necessarily, but the ways superstitions play out, and kind of what it means to live on the fringe of society. Highly recommend it.
And lastly, The Impossible Resurrection of Grief by Octavia Cade. This is a really interesting book that is very literary, I feel, in the way that it approaches things. It is kind of a climate fiction book that is set in a little bit farther in the future than we are now, where there has been even more mass extinction of animals, and people start going through something called the grief, where they are just overcome with grief for the loss of all of this biodiversity, and they descend into just some really dark places and often become very suicidal. And so we follow a woman who is a scientist, and she's surrounded by a lot of people who've gone through this, and she ends up sort of embarking on almost a murder mystery, trying to uncover some of what had happened to one of her friends that was a scientist, and some interesting, strange things that are going on. I thought that the writing in this was gorgeous. The themes were wonderful. A lot of it went over my head, but I think that it's doing something really neat in sci-fi, and so I definitely think it's award worthy. Now moving on to the novelettes, starting with Judge Dee and the Three Deaths of Count Verdenfels by Lavie Tidhar. This is the second novelette in this Judge Dee series, and it is such a great series. Basically, this series is about Judge Dee, who is a vampire judge, and he goes around judging vampires who've broken the very, very few rules that the Vampire Council has decided exist. He has sort of a human companion who tags along as well. And Judge Dee is one of those, sort of a Sherlock Holmes style of retelling, but it's got this great humor and fantastical setting, and the antics that the vampires get up to is really interesting. It is a little gruesome because obviously it's vampires and there's death and stuff. And in this story, Judge Dee is called out to basically figure out some issues of succession. So there is Count Verdenfels who has been murdered, and there's a bunch of people saying that they are the ones who should inherit the new kind of castle. So it's just a very fun and interesting and sort of twisty-turny, amusing story, and I really enjoyed it.
Next up, we have another Judge Dee story, Judge Dee and the Poisoner of Montmartre by Lavie Tidhar. And if you are a fan of Agatha Christie's Poirot, I think you'll really like the story. And because I think in this story, Judge Dee is part of a social gathering where stuff ensues. And it's so funny with the twists and turns. It is self-aware and kind of like aware of the genre in which the story exists, and kind of plays with it in a really, really fun way. So I highly recommend reading this. I think to say more would kind of spoil a few things. So yeah.
And lastly is Questions Asked in the Belly of the World by A.T. Greenblatt. This is a sci-fi story that takes place on some other planet that humans have colonized, and they live in a symbiotic relationship with the planet that they're on. And the symbiotic relationship requires that in return for the energy that they get, they produce art, and they give back this kind of artistic light that they have to the earth. And sometimes people end up not being able to really give that light back, and they're no longer useful on the planet. And we follow a couple where the husband ends up having some issues, and it seems like maybe he will no longer be useful. And so it's about the couple trying to figure out what to do. There's a lot of commentary about art and about inner light and about sort of social expectations, and I just loved this story centered around this couple. It was really, really beautiful. Now moving on to the short stories, starting with another A.T. Greenblatt story, The Stop After the Last Station. I thought that this was such a great story. It's basically about a person who is on a train that is going to a very interesting place, the stop after the last station. And it's sort of told in reverse, talking about each station up until that point and the decisions that this person had to make and the decisions of the people around them. And this, again, this is also about art in a very interesting way, and about what you're willing to give up. I thought it was beautifully told. I really liked the interesting format of it, and I just really loved the writing.
Next up, we have The White Road, or How a Crow Carried Death Over a River by Marika Bailey in FIYAH number 18. This was such a neat classic fairy tale like story, and it's kind of like a formation myth of the mythos of a world kind of story. And it's about a young little crow that sets out to earn its name. And basically what I really like about the story is it weaves in some of the very traditional structures of fairy tales, things like, you know, the going past your limits of endurance and then going a little bit more, and then what do you find? You find something new and fresh. Notions of tales and stories inside a culture, notions of quests and things like that. And it just weaves in so much world building into such a short period that it's really nice. But in addition, there's this notion of what the crow is doing in the moment and having an adventure and things like that. But then it zooms out a little bit and says, what does this say about the world that these things existed in the first place, that you then have to go on an adventure to do something about it. And what should we do about the broader world? Okay. And I absolutely love that. I think this is one of the breed of stories which is very modern, but also taking format of old stories and reviving them. And I absolutely loved it, and I highly recommend it.
Another story from FIYAH number issue 18 is Rememory by Kristen Reynolds. This is a really neat dystopian sci-fi that is following a woman who has sold off her memories, in this world you can do that, to fund her search for her daughter who was stolen from her. And she has been searching for her for years. She ends up having some things happen such that some of these memories start coming back to her. And this story is so philosophical in talking about trauma and memories and grief and healing, and I just really liked the way that the sci-fi elements were used to talk about those themes.
And then we have To Rest and to Create by L.A. Knight in FIYAH issue number 19. This is a very different take on the portal fantasy formula. And it features a character who I believe is autistic. And this story has so much going for it by way of color and sounds being fleshed out, in addition to a lot of the typical descriptors that you see in stories. And it is a story full of heart. It is a story that basically, again, is a reimagining of a lot of the conventional formula, but from a new perspective. So I think this is definitely a story that is kind of pushing the envelope in that sense. So I highly recommend it.
Another story from FIYAH issue number 19 is Morning by Diane Russell. This is a really neat kind of space sci-fi about a teenage girl who is on a very hard to colonize planet with a small group of other colonizers, but has suffered a loss because her twin sister passed away while in cryogenic sleep, except that because the colony desperately needs people, they have made a clone of her sister, and now she's having to work with her sister as they go out on these expeditions, and there is so much to work through. They had a difficult relationship before her sister died, and now she doesn't even know what to think about this clone. And so this is very much about family relationships, but it's also about sort of what happens to the people who the systems don't care about and how do they survive. And it's just a beautiful story of family and survival.
And finally, we read a short story collection called Alien Stories by E.C. Osundu last year. And it was easily my favorite collection of short stories. E.C. Osundu uses the term alien to kind of mean immigrants, to mean outsiders, minorities, people who don't completely fit into a norm in a certain place, but also literal space aliens. And frequently in his stories, it is not clear which sense that term is being used in, and it freely jumps back and forth in some of the cases. These stories are full of people that are nosy and up in your business, and they're full of stories where there is something deeply uncomfortable that is going on, and it lets you marinate in that discomfort. And these stories frequently have things that are related in sort of a neutral tone kind of an idea, or as if nothing is wrong and oblivious about what is being said, but frequently delivers strong social commentary and very, very kind of like satirical takes on things when you make you realize how ridiculous things you see on a day-to-day life that resemble that are. It also frequently veers off into the absurd and leaves you without resolution. So I'm going to preface all of that, but all of that really made these stellar collection for me, and of which there are two stories that are standout stories that are eligible for nominations this year in the Hugos, and so I'm going to be nominating these two stories. The first is a story called Light, and this is a story about a woman that is reformed by a blue light from the sky. She's kind of the village troublemaker, so to speak, in terms of how people see her. And then she is reformed and she is a model woman. And it is so biting in what it says and how people react to her. And it's excellent. The other one that I'd recommend is a story called Traveler, which is a very simple story about the narrator kind of taking kind of like a ride in a train. And there's an old man who notices that the narrator is an alien and comes up to talk to him, or talk at him in some cases. And so absolutely beautiful story. I highly recommend these and the collection in general.
So those are the main categories that we're nominating in, but there are a couple of other categories where we have 1 or 2 nominations, starting with semi-prose zine. And for this, we're nominating FIYAH Literary Magazine. This is one that has just been doing such great work. We're really loving the stories, we're really loving their approach, and sort of what their mission is. So definitely worthy of an award.
Next up in the graphic novel category, we have Oxy by Marie Ahokoivu and Silja Maria Arompuro, who was the translator for it. This is a Finnish, I believe, creation myth, and kind of the story of how bears came to be. It was so beautiful. I know Shannon has a standalone review, I think?
No, I just have a wrap up.
Okay. But there's some examples of the art in that video, and it was gorgeous. And it was so fantastical. I think this is kind of like the best of both art and story coming together in doing a great job of delivering a very, very rich narrative. Highly recommended.
Next is the Lodestar Award for Best New Young Adult Novel. For this, there are 2 books from my choices for this year for Best Novel, Bad Witch Burning by Jessica Lewis and A Snake Falls to Earth by Darcie Littlebadger, which are both YA, so I'll nominate them for this category as well. And the last category that I wanted to mention is Fancast. Fancast is for podcasts or for BookTube, anything like that. So just as a note, if you guys are nominating for the Hugos, you can nominate any booktuber you like. Last year, Rachel at Kalanadi as well as Claire at Claire Rousseau both made the shortlist, which was so exciting. So definitely, if there's any booktubers who you think are doing like a great job within the sort of SFF genre, you can nominate them. It would be so cool to see them like really shine in this, because I love what booktubers are doing. Okay, so those are our nominations for the Hugos for this year. It'll be really interesting to see in another month or 2 what the short list ends up being. I know that some of the things on my list are maybe not things I've heard too many other people talk about, so they may not make it. But even if these don't make the list, everything that we talked about today is stuff that we really, really loved and would highly recommend. So if you guys have read any of these, if you're interested in any of them, if you have other things that you're planning on nominating, anything at all, go ahead and leave us a comment down below.